Inside, Maya Angelou has withdrawn into deep silence. Not because she has nothing to say, but because the one voice she believed could hold this country together has just been shot through the neck on a motel balcony in Memphis. And something inside her, something she spent decades rebuilding, brick by fragile brick, has shattered again. This is a story about silence. And what happens when a woman who already lost her voice once withdraws into deep grief and silence again? To understand the apartment in 1968, you have to go back, way back to a tiny town called Stamps, Arkansas, in the early 1930s. Picture dusty roads and wooden storefronts, a general store run by a tall, unbreakable black woman, Maya's grandmother, whom she called Mama. Stamps was a world divided in two, white and black, with rules carved into the air itself. Black children crossed the street when white adults approached. Black women were called girl, no matter their age. And yet inside the black community, there was something the segregationists could never reach: a dignity that lived in church pews on Sunday mornings, in the way women pressed their cotton dresses with heavy irons, in the stories passed between generations like hymns. Little Marguerite Johnson absorbed all of it, the beauty and the terror. At 8 years old, she was sent to live with her mother in Street Louis. And there, something unspeakable happened. A man her mother trusted, her mother's partner, assaulted her. When young Marguerite told her family, when she named him out loud, the man was arrested. Days later, he was found dead, likely killed by her own uncles. And that's the moment the silence began. Because in her 8-year-old mind, her voice had killed a man, her words had caused a death. And so she made a decision no child should ever have to make. She stopped speaking entirely. For nearly 5 years, Marguerite Johnson did not say a single word. Think about that. 5 years of silence. A little girl moving through the world like a ghost, watching everything, absorbing everything, but refusing to let language leave her lips. It was literature that brought her back. A teacher in Stamps' Mrs. Flowers placed books into her hands. Dickens, Shakespeare, Poe. She told the girl that poetry was meant to be spoken aloud, that words on a page were only half alive until a human voice gave them breath. Slowly, carefully, Marguerite began to read aloud, first in whispers, then in full sentences, then in paragraphs that filled the room. She was reclaiming her voice. But the world was not done trying to take it. As a teenager in San Francisco, she became a mother at 17. She worked as a fry cook, a streetcar conductor, a cocktail waitress, anything to survive. Then came the stage. She discovered she could dance, she could sing, and she found herself touring Europe and Africa in a production of Porgy and Bess, stepping into spotlight after spotlight, her body and voice filling theaters far from Arkansas dust. But even the stage had its cages. Black women in entertainment were ornaments, allowed to dazzle but never to speak on their own terms. Maya wanted more than applause. She wanted meaning, so she went to find it. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, she threw herself into the civil rights movement. She organized, fundraised, marched. She worked alongside Malcolm X in New York, debating strategy in smoke-filled rooms where the future of Black America was being argued over in urgent, low voices. She moved to Ghana during the era of African independence, teaching at the University of Ghana, walking through Accra's streets surrounded by Pan-African intellectuals who were reimagining what freedom could look like for people of the African diaspora worldwide. For the first time, Maya felt her voice was part of something larger, a chorus of liberation that stretched across oceans. Then Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. She grieved, but pressed on. She returned to the United States, drawn by the gravity of the movement, drawn specifically by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who asked her to work closely with him, and the movement through the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She said yes. She was going to begin on April 4th, 1968. April 4th. That was the day they killed him. And that is how we arrive back at the apartment. The drawn curtains, the piled-up mail, the ringing phone. Friends came, James Baldwin, the writer, among them. He didn't knock politely. He came in. He sat with her. He let the silence be what it was. And then, days later, he did something that would alter the course of American literature. He brought her to what is often reconstructed as a dinner with an editor from Random House. Baldwin knew what Maya herself had forgotten, that her silence had never been emptiness. It had always been a room filling with pressure, waiting to become something. In that often retold scene, the editor challenged her. Writing an autobiography as literature, they said, was nearly impossible. And Maya Angelou, competitive, stubborn, still shattered with grief, heard the word impossible and felt something ignite. She began to write. Not on stages, not in meeting rooms. Alone, in a small room with a typewriter and a yellow legal pad, she poured decades of silence onto the page. The girl in stamps, the cotton dresses, the assault, the muteness, the slow, aching return of language, the stages, the smoke-filled strategy rooms, the funeral of a king. The book was called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Published in 1970, it broke the world open. Maya Angelou was never healed in the way we like our stories, to end neatly, completely. The scars stayed, the grief stayed. What changed was what she did with the silence. She stopped treating it as a wound and began treating it as a well, deep, dark, and full of everything she'd ever witnessed. There's a line people quote often: the caged bird sings. But they forget the rest. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still. It doesn't sing because it's free. It sings because it must. That is what Maya Angelou understood better than almost anyone who ever held a pen. That voice isn't the absence of pain. Voice is what pain becomes when you refuse finally, completely, with everything you have left, to be silent. If this story moved you, take a moment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And we'll see you in the next one.